to joining government, I was a journalist for 15 years, working at the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times, and moving home about 10 years ago to help be one of the founding editors of Honolulu Civil Beat. So I'm very happy to be part of this forward-looking discussion, and I appreciate Senator Chang for kind of being the, I don't know, whipping us up into thinking a little bit differently about what we could do when it comes to satisfying the housing needs that we have for our state. So in this panel, we're going to talk about infrastructure needs for large-scale housing developments. And remember that throughout, you can submit your questions to hawaiihousingconference@gmail.com. We're going to have 3 presenters, and I'll introduce them individually before each of their presentations. But we'll be covering water, sewer, and electrical power. And all of these are super important if we're going to try to build houses anywhere, because you need somewhere for the water and the poop and, you know, to power your house. Our first presenter, thank you very much for Jack to be stepping in. This is Jack Pobuk, the branch chief in charge of CIP program and planning with the Office of, the Department of Environmental Services for the City of Honolulu. We appreciate him being here to step in at the last minute since Tim was ill. He's going to be talking about wastewater infrastructure and what's necessary in case we do want to try to go dense, and also about some of the plans that the city already has in place to upgrade our existing infrastructure. So with that, I am going to kick it off to Jack.
Yeah, thank you. I think I know most of this presentation pretty well. I work with Tim all the time, and I think I helped put some of this together. So Tim and I know all this. I'm much taller than him. So next slide. I guess I control that here. Okay. So we'll be talking about some of the major projects that we're doing, ongoing and also planned. And it's focused mostly in the TOD areas. Global consent decree from the years 2010 to 2020, we've been focusing on the collection system projects that are required by the consent decree. And when we have to do a project, and most of these are done or in progress now, we have accommodated the future projections for capacity needs at the same time. Realizing, of course, that the consent decree projects don't satisfy all the capacity needs. We have been given a directive to address the TOD needs. We started that planning about 10 years ago. And so this presentation kind of shows you what we're doing in addition to the consent decree projects. And so first, is an overall map of the Honolulu Basin. It's a very large wastewater basin. It starts at the wastewater treatment plant at Honolulu. Does this have a red pointer thing?
I think so, yeah. Try the before.
Okay, well, it's in the lower left corner there, the Honolulu treatment plant. Very large sewers that head over to West Lock and around Pearl Harbor area. Okay. And so very large sewers. This is an 84-inch sewer. These are force mains here, 48-inch, 42-inch diameter, and so on, 42-inch diameter sewers all the way to Halava. And this large system that we have is very important for the TOD development areas. There's some capacity restrictions here, and so we've been working on a program to what we need to do to upgrade the system. And so we have some projects in place, in planning. We're going to be building a new force main here for the Waipau pump station. It crosses over Navy land and under West Lock and connects to Geiger Road sewer here. And the Pearl City pump station also has future restrictions that we project, and so we are planning to do some upgrades there. And the leading alternative we have now is to put in a trunk sewer from Pearl City over to Waipahu, kind of following the bike path. And that will allow us actually to eliminate this pump station. And so we would have a new pump station here at Waipahu, and this would be all gravity. And so on forth up this line here, we have some other restrictions. So I'll just kind of run through the projects. This talks about the Honolulu treatment plant project. If you drive by the plant right now, we have a lot of construction going on, and that's for the secondary treatment upgrade, which has to be done by 2024.
That's better than I can.
This is a picture of the Waipahu force main. So the blue line is existing. We have dual force mains, a 42 and a 48 inch, and we'll be putting in another 48 inch line, this orange line, and that's in planning. And then here's just a list of some of the projects. So new force main will be rehabilitating the 2 existing force mains and upsizing or rehabilitating Waipahu pump station facilities. This is a picture of this existing system from Pearl City to Waipahu. And so, again, we're planning to be able to eliminate this pump station and put a gravity trunk line kind of following the bike path, and then new pumping facilities there at Waipahu. And so here's listed some of the projects that are involved with that. Trunk sewer, rehabilitation work, and then demolishing the old Pearl City pump station. There's some future development planned, this Waiava area. Whoops. Can I go back? This area. And also we have rail coming in here with train stations, and expecting future TOD development on this corridor. And so we've been looking at what we need to do to serve wastewater service to all these areas. And this is long-range planning, looking at some corridors for some large trunk sewers to connect to this future Pearl City to Waipahu trunk sewer. And they put a date here, at 2032. So this is like a 15-year program we're looking at. Waimalu area. Again, some need to upgrade. We'll probably be putting in a upsized sewer trunk line. Some of these are off the street, so you won't even see them when they get built. Some will be in alongside Cam Highway. The Waimalu pump station will need some upgrade over here. And there's listed some of the projects. Oh yeah, the last one goes all the way out to 2037, so that's more than 15 years away. And then the Lava area. This is kind of at the far end of our major trunk lines here, getting all the way to the stadium. So when people talk about stadium redevelopment, here in our sewer department, we're kind of concerned because it's way, way at the end of our system. But we're planning to get there. And so we've got some plans. Some of this can happen within 10 years. Some may have to wait to the end of the whole program. But the sewer upgrades, pump station upgrades, force main upgrades. Sand Island Basin, also very important for serving TOD areas. And we have quite a few projects in construction. Some of these are because of the consent decree, and some are for just additional capacity. So where it says the number 1 there, there's the Waikimilo Road trunk sewer. You may have noticed there's a lot of construction activity there. For the next year, there'll be quite a bit. Sorry, it'll be congesting the traffic there, but once we get that in, it will free up a lot of capacity in this whole area. Number 2 over there is what we call the Kamehameha Highway Wastewater Pump Station, so we're upgrading that. Number 3 is a new force main we're putting in for that pump station. That's all in construction. Number 4, we have a upgrade going on at Ala Moana Pump Station, putting in another pump. Number 5, there's some upcoming very large projects there, the upgrade to secondary treatment, which all has to be done by 2035. Number 6, in this area, we have both 6 and 7, we have some other projects that we're planning for upgrades. And some of this is specifically for the developments that we know about. And then this lists some of the projects. Most of these will happen within the next 5 to 6 years, except for the secondary treatment plant upgrade that goes to 2035. I think one of the main points that Tim wanted me to make was that these kind of large programs, large wastewater projects, they do take time. And so what we need to know is where's the development happening? And so we can account for that and put it in our planning and start building the projects. So we are using the available information we have from the TOD planners and from all the other agencies who are giving us information on where their projects will be. And this last slide just talks a little bit about some of the things we have done. So we put in the second digester at Sand Island in 2017. So that really helped us a lot. So right now the Sand Island treatment plant is not a restriction for this, even for the TOD development, it should be okay. And then we have planning funds in our current budget to continue with our long-range planning for both Sand Island and other basins. And that is it. Okay.
He was right on time, right to the buzzer. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Jack. Just a quick question while this is still fresh with folks. Can you just make a quick comment about how this is pretty neat and exciting to see all of these things in planning, but how is it paid for?
It's from the sewer fees that we collect, and that's according to our long-range financial plan. The wastewater function is supported by the sewer fees.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Our next presenter will be talking about water. This is going to be Mr. Barry Usagawa. He is the Water Resources Program Administrator for the Board of Water Supply. Mr. Usagawa has been part of the Board of Water Supply for 34 years, serving in various positions, and he holds a civil engineering degree from the University of Hawaii. And he will be talking about and address one of the major components of Oahu's carrying capacity, which is our sustainable water supply. So, Barry, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I was joking with Dean Uchida about his comment about the housing champion, the malevolent dictator. And I appreciated that he tells it like it is. And we're joking saying it's because we're too old not to. We've been in it too long, man. We don't have enough time left. We gotta tell it like it is. So there are two questions that were posed to this panel. And so, do we have the infrastructure for large-scale new housing projects? Yes. Depends where, but yes. Does the island have the water capacity and resources to sustain major population growth? And the answer again is yes. And I'm going to try to explain that in the next 10 minutes. So adequacy of water resources, I'm going to start with the supply and then get into the, some of our requirements for development so you get that. So we have 3 water resource strategies. We have to always focus on the forest because that's where water comes from. Healthy forests recharges our aquifer, slows runoff, prevents polluted runoff into our nearshore waters. Our water conservation program, and I'll get some slides on that, but it's very, very important on how we use water efficiently, but also conserve the resource for the next generations, right? We can't just use it all up. We can't mine it today just for, for development's sake. And I'll get into that. And the way we do that is also through diversifying our water supplies. So we're 100% groundwater for drinking, but we certainly want to expand our recycled water system. We're trying to build the first seawater desalination plant down the street here. Right behind us is a brackish desalination plant project. It's still on the books, but not quite yet. And certainly, renewable energy efficiency is key to those strategies. So our water plant is based on that. You know that you live over your drinking water aquifer, cross section of Oahu. This is the large basal aquifer. Winter side is more high-level dike systems, but they don't have enough volume in the aquifer. So windward, although it's wet, if it wasn't raining, it would run out of water because the groundwater is not that big. But in central Oahu and Honolulu, we have 800 feet of fresh water lands that we're living over, and that's because of the cap rock, coral and sediments that have been deposited over the years, and that's what's blue on this map. So if you don't think that there's enough ocean water or ice, is enough seawater that could inundate, Oahu, just look at the history of Oahu. This is the old shoreline, because I know that because in Ewa, you heard of the Coral Creek Golf Course? Because it's all coral. Coral don't grow above water. There's enough ice, if it melted on the planet, you could raise sea levels by 200 feet. So that's my sea level rise comment. I'll get into that a little bit later, but it's this cap rock that dams the fresh water from leaking out, like how you see in Big Island. They don't have a cap rock like this because it's a younger island. We've seen 2 cycles of submergence and emergence of sea level, and that has deposited the cap rock, and it creates this huge, thick aquifer, thicker than all the islands. Of course, with the aquifers, we have an aquifer management system. I think again from the law school said he worked on the water code. Well, the Water Commission's job is to ensure that the resources are sustainable, so they've identified and evaluated sustainable yields for the 24 aquifers on the island. We cannot pump more than that. If we pump more than that, we're depleting it, and that will never happen because there are permits and rules in place that you cannot pump more than that. So it's sustainable in perpetuity. The sustainable yield, I just reduced it, but it's about 400 million gallons per day. What is that? We're using about half of that, by the way. Half of that. We got 1 million people on this island using half the water. So is there enough resources? Yeah, but not quite in the Honolulu area where we are pumping close to the sustainable yield. In Waimalu, we freed up some water because of the conservation savings. I'll get into that. In Waipahu, Waiawa, because the sugar plantations closed, they freed up a lot of the groundwater that now can be used for development. We have a very complex integrated water system on the island, connecting the windward all the way to Maka'a. But we have 194 wells, 13 treatment plants, 171 potable reservoirs, and 2,100 miles of pipeline, 21,000 fire hydrants, 170,000 water services. The 2,100 miles of water line takes a lot of money to repair and replace it. So the idea of having high density development is good in that way because you're not expanding, adding tens of miles of pipeline that has to be repaired and replaced over time. So are you placing those developments in areas where we have the system capacity? That's the question. The answer is yes. Just understanding that we do pump water from windward a little bit over to Honolulu and from Pearl Harbor east and all the way to Maka'a. It's just how we transfer water through our system because it's integrated, but it gives us resilience. There's drought on the one side, we can move. If there's a contamination, because we live over aquifer, right? You gotta watch what you put down on the ground because it's contaminated, right? Fuel tanks, for instance. If it does, so we can move water from one region to another. We did a population projection, and because of the city's directed growth policy, everything's focused towards South Oahu. So Ewa, Central Oahu, and the primary urban center are where development is supposed to be directed. And that's to keep the country, right? So we invest our infrastructure in South Oahu just for large capacity type housing developments. Our conservation program is a big success story. We started in 1990. Since then, we're pumping less today than we did in 1990 through efficiencies. It was primarily through low-flow toilets, plumbing code changes, that kind of thing. But we save 10 million gallons per year. And people are using less water now per person, 156 versus 187 on average. So thank you for how you're conserving water. Our old manager used to say, use what you need, but don't waste it. And conservation is the key. This is just a graph of Honolulu's water system's water use. Back in 1990, we were peaking out at about 85 MGD. And since then, even going through, it's only to 2012, but it extends. We're using about 15 million gallons less in town. That system capacity, those pumps are still there. And so is there enough water to accommodate TOD, for Kaka'ako, for Iwale, for some high-density housing? Yes, because it's there. Conservation savings has freed up that capacity, and now it's cheaper to actually reuse that capacity than if we had to build all new stuff. But of course, you have to repair and replace it, but it's there. So, water availability. What we like to do is for large developments is require water master plans, because then we can understand what the development is proposing. So it includes a land use plan, a number of residential units in commercial areas. And by the way, when you go higher in high density developments, you use less water per unit. So in our high-rise residential water demand is just 200 gallons per unit. It used to be 300. For a single family, it was 500 gallons per unit, and now it's 400 because of those efficiencies. For low-rise multifamily townhouses, from 400 gallons to 300. So if you do the numbers, and there are some scenarios there, but if you were to multiply, so what is a million gallons? What kind of, if you have a million gallons of capacity, you can serve 5,000 high-rise units. Okay, so just keep that in mind. 1 million gallons, 5,000 high-rise units. Of course, diversifying potable and non-potable is a strategy, conservation measures. The availability of water, though, is determined when you submit your building permit to the Board of Water Supply. We look at the number of units and the number of fixtures total, and we multiply the fixtures times our impact fee rate. So that's the water systems facilities charges for resource development, transmission, and daily storage. If you have less fixtures, you save on the impact fee. If you use less water, you pay less in a water bill. Okay, so that's the way our structure is. We're trying to promote conservation, and we're trying to ensure that there's enough water for growth. And by the way, water, wastewater as well, I think, and some others have, for affordable units, we waive the impact fee. That was just adopted last year. For qualifying affordable units, you don't have to pay that impact fee. And then, of course, conservation efficiencies, water sense labeled low-flow toilets, fixtures, non-potable water. I'd like to actually expand into the AC area, cooling tower, connectivity meters, maybe water softening, recycling systems. The landscaping can be drought tolerant. And of course, the city has low-impact development practices to manage stormwater runoff and maybe reuse that. It's capture, recharge, and reuse. And that's the way we can stretch that gallon farther. And of course, green infrastructure will do that as well. Last slides. So we have rules around availability of water. If non-potable is available, you have to use it. If you have an existing and we have a non-potable system, once we notify you, we give you 5 years to convert. you have one choice for new development, right? You always have one choice. You can either connect to the non-potable system, or you don't have, or you're free not to build. You're not gonna get a meter, if you don't hook up, right? So we have a recycled water system in Eva. Aloha Stadium is in particular a really good area because we have two big transmission mains going right around the stadium, potable, and we have a non-potable, it's the line going right around the stadium, and that's from Kalawao Spring, the Sumida Watercress Farm. We capture that flow through, and we use it to irrigate H1 freeway, the DOT airport, Hawaiian cement, and could be a Aloha Stadium as well. And with that,
Thank you.
I'll end there. But if you want to know about sea level rise, we're working on that too. But anyway, you can ask me about that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Our final presenter will be Rodney Chong. He is a Vice President of Energy Delivery for Hawaiian Electric Company, and he's been with HECO for 28 years in many various positions and is a proud graduate of the University of Hawaii's Electrical Engineering program. Now, electrical has been called, the new sewer, I should say, one of the real critical barriers to new housing development in Hawaii. So we're very happy to have Rodney here today. And also joining us for the conversation afterwards will also be Mr. Gary Fukumoto, who is the Manager of Customer Installations, Engineering, and Project Management at HECO, to join us in the discussion afterwards. So, Rodney, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. So, I want to talk a little bit about, what is the process? What does it take to connect customers to the grid? And I think that's what, this forum's about, is how do we remove the roadblocks or plan ahead to make sure that these developments can happen? So, our vision is to, we have an obligation to service, to empower our customers. And, obviously, you should know by now that we also have an aggressive goal to get to 100% renewable by 2045. So I think there's been a recent view that, hey, we have a shortage of energy. And that's not always the case. That's not totally the truth, because we do have ample amount of supply, really, to serve. A lot of the projects that you might be hearing about, such as the PV and wind projects, is really to get us to wean ourselves off of our fossil generation and get to more renewables. So that's really the gist of the activity that's going on right now. But, supply is evaluated on an annual basis. We do something called an adequacy of supply study. And it takes into account load forecasts and peak demands and so forth. So it's not as if, we're not worried about it. We're looking at it every year. But, as folks probably can attest to, we have a lot of PV on our islands. So PV is great during the day. We have ample supply of that. But obviously, when we all go home in the evenings and start washing clothes, cooking food, that's when our peak load is really in the evening. And obviously, there's no PV there. So we always have to keep a watchful eye on that. So connection to the grid, the key thing here is, and I've heard it brought up in various speakers' presentations, is really to plan ahead. And, it's early planning, collaboration, really identifying the location, the scope of it, what's the size and what's the load going to be. And this is a common theme for, not just us, but for water and sewer and so forth. So all of that has to be taken into account. Real quick, there's some information here. I won't spend a whole lot of time, but on our website, HawaiianElectric.com, if you go under electrical service, there's a link for builders, developers, and contractors, and there's more information there you can get on the process. And there's a link to a handout that speaks into more detail as far as what are the steps that are taken for a development. Obviously, something really big like what's being talked about in some of these scenarios here. Obviously, what it takes is really getting the key infrastructure people together to talk about the different options, because that's something that needs to be vetted and talked through rather than submitted in the form. And this is the handout that's you can get from the website. Again, it's there's a lot of information there, but again, this is more for residential or maybe single customer connections to the grid, like single condos and that type of thing. I want to spend a little time on this cartoon. So at a high level, this is kind of, I think, what we're talking about here when it comes to electrical service and connecting to the grid. You know, we have power plants, we have renewable plants, we have a transmission grid, sub-transmission grid, but I think most of what you folks are looking at is how we're connecting to our distribution portion of the grid. And typically, you know, it's fed by a 12,000 volts or 25,000 volt circuit. And you know, the circuits are originating from a substation, and it's going through the streets and so forth, connecting to homes and buildings. So you know, I like to use the analogy of you know, our electrical conductors is like water pipes. So you know, you only can serve so much water off a certain size pipe, and the same thing goes for electricity too. So if a circuit is overtaxed with a lot of connections, then obviously, you know, we may need another circuit. So in this picture here on the top right-hand corner, that section of circuit I colored red, for example, you know, if there's like one or two new requests coming in and we have enough capacity on the black line to the left, then maybe it's a relatively simple connection. It's just tapping into that circuit and connecting it to the building. There's enough availability on that circuit. On the other hand, if it's a really large development, you know, look at the picture on the bottom here, the red line with the arrow, we may need a brand new circuit coming out of the nearby substation, so that's way more involved. The substation might be, you know, half a mile to a mile away, and so that's a lot of, if it's an overhead neighborhood, that's a lot of poles, or if it's underground, then it's a lot of duct lines that need to be trenched into the road. So it's more significant effort. And if we're even thinking even bigger, where there's not enough circuit capacity in the area, then we have to look at the substation. Do we add another transformer? Or if that substation is built out, do we need another substation? Okay, so again, it really depends on the location, the size of the project, and the way that we serve the customers can take different forms, as I kind of illustrated there. Sorry, I forgot about the animation. Okay. So, you know, underground circuits, some of you have seen this before, you're in the industry, but to the right, you know, duct lines for underground service for new circuits. Typically, those are installed by the developer's contractor. You know, once that's installed per our specification, inspected and so forth, then, you know, we come in and we put in the electrical cable and the equipment like transformers and so forth, yeah? So that's typically the process. I wanted to show you this too, but what I talked about in a couple slides ago, where, you know, if the request is large enough where at the substation, which is upstream on a grid, we may need to put in another transformer, like in the picture to the right. So that's a more significant undertaking, and usually coupled with that is that you're going to have to build a new duct line and run new circuit to where the load is, okay? Or you might need to build a new substation. I mean, typically, our distribution substations can serve roughly about 40 megawatts based on how we configure it. But you know, it really depends on the project and the location. I want to talk about the process. It can be a long process, and this is a very simplified graphic that shows, you know, for our service requests, we obviously do planning. We do planning, we ask for an application, there's a rough estimate, there's some engineering done, and then a final estimate and so forth. But the part that I highlighted in yellow is that we are a regulated utility, regulated by the PUC, so projects that exceed $2.5 million, we do have to submit an application to the commission to get approval. And those can run from 12 to 18 months. You know, regulation is always changing, and one of the new things that has come up is that in an effort to be cost conscious and efficient, the Commission is asking us to do a new type of analysis called a non-wires alternative analysis. So what does that mean? No, electricity is not wireless yet, but it's looking at options of using energy efficiency to reduce the load demand, so that we don't maybe have to put in a lot of infrastructure. Maybe it's a customer being able to have a PV battery system that can offset some of their demand and so forth. So it's many options that we need to look at, but the key thing there is that it's an added step that we haven't done in the past, and it does take time. So there's a lot of upfront work that comes with that. And of course, once we get approval, then we go to the construction and energization piece. One last thing I want to leave you with, and it's really good that I heard this, but the key thing is having a lead agency to take leadership on these large projects, because credit to Senator Chang for bringing us together, because you can't just look at these in silos. They have to be looked at together. And I'll take the Ola Stadium as an example. And one of these scenarios is very big. I think it was scenario A. But we all have to get together on a table and say, okay, what would it take for Board of Water Supply and for the city, for Hawaiian Electric? And we may compare these scenarios and find out that I think in this scenario, it's easier for Hawaiian Electric, but it's going to be a long project for the water supply, for example. So all these combinations kind of got to be looked at holistically, and because it might be one scenario might be easier for us but harder for someone else, and vice versa. So I think it has to be looked at holistically. And the key thing is, as I pointed out before, is that some of these scenarios, if you have many customers, it's hard to coordinate. And if you have a lead agency or a master developer or whatever to bring all the parties together, I think that's the best way forward. Okay, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for that presentation, Rodney. So it looks like we're going to have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. And those folks online are on top of it. For folks in the audience, in case you have questions, feel free to line up in the corners at the mics. But I guess I'll get us going here. Now, one of the overall questions to the panel was, do we have the infrastructure to accommodate large-scale new housing development? It sounds like the answer is yes, definitely yes, and yes, we're working on it. So my question is twofold. One is it going to happen fast enough? Is there any way to kind of speed it up, or is this just kind of the speed at which it takes to plan things out? Like, are there things that we can do differently to get the sewer there sooner than 2030, or is that just how long it takes? And the second part of the question is we've heard a little bit about it. When density goes up, do you see the infrastructure cost going down a little bit, or does it affect the per unit cost of the infrastructure? And I'll let you guys take that however you like.
I've never seen infrastructure costs go down.
Well, not down, but I was thinking about this because you did say that water demand goes down when you're in a high-rise development. So I was wondering, does that make it cheaper to get to the building then? Since it's all concentrated in one place, or if we're concentrating along a TOD area, how does that affect things?
I'm sorry, I was just going to be. But yeah, our facilities charges were and we're just going through that process now. It would be higher than it would be if we had to build all new. Because we have freed up capacity, the cost of the resale of that capacity, because we have to repair and replace it, is less. So certainly, if you're near trunk lines where we have the capacity, then we can serve them pretty readily. how long? Yeah, it's a building permit process. So it has to go through multiple agencies. They do have a one-stop, Jack. Maybe you know the one-stop permit center. But anyway, I don't want to misspeak. But it does take a while. It takes us time to actually build our projects as well. But we want to make sure that they're both to standard, and we're not, infringing on any EV or those are significant issues.
Yeah, part of that question was, can we do things to speed up projects? And so, yeah, we're always looking for ways. It depends a lot on where we're talking about and so many factors. And there's tons of different approvals we have to get. Dealing with, we talk about putting sewers in streets, so you have to deal with traffic and coordinating with the other utilities and noise variances and getting off-duty policemen to direct traffic, and there's 100 different things that have to be pushed to try to get a sewer project pushed. And so the best thing to do is build where we have capacity available. We don't need to do a sewer project. Yeah.
Yeah, similar to what was said earlier, the timing is something that we would all like to do quicker. There is a lot of collaboration, a lot of hopefully not duplicate efforts going in the same corridors, so that's something that could definitely help the speed, is if the planning is all collaborated. And as Rodney had mentioned earlier, if there's an overall lead agency to master plan a large area, that would definitely help rather than single developments or group developments coming in. So as far as cost, I think the question that Sarah had asked about the per unit cost for power, at least, if it is a high density area, you could bring a lot of power to smaller locations. So I think definitely the per unit cost would be cheaper. The challenge for Hawaiian Electric anyway with infrastructure is a lot of these projects that we're seeing now are redevelopments of existing areas. So in the past they were low density, they already have distribution circuits. Now that they're being proposed to be high density developments, the capacity that is in the area right now is not sufficient. So it's a matter of, can we utilize what's already in the ground, or do we have to bring in new circuits? And the new circuits require new duct lines, so it is a lengthy process. The earlier we start, the better off we'll all be.
Okay. Thank you for that. So these questions come from online. Let me get one online question, and then we'll go to the folks in the audience. Let's see. Okay. Well, Stanley from Kahala asks, could you briefly, could you guys cue up that one slide that showed the density scenarios by chance? Anyway, there's one scenario in which it talks about 60,000 new units at the stadium. And Stanley from Kahala is wondering if you could briefly walk us through what it would take to address something like that. What kind of new facilities would be needed? What would they cost? Who would pay for them? And this kind of brings up something I was thinking about too as I was looking at your presentation, Jack, just talking about timing. Given that upgrades to the stadium won't come until the end of your line there, and 2030, 2025, 2030, 2035, around there, what does that mean that we can do now as far as planning, and does that give us some lead time for, but yeah, if you could walk us through what it would take to do that level of density. Scenario C.
Yeah, that particular proposal, 60,000 units, I'm not sure if I heard that one yet. But we have had meetings with the various agencies involved with the stadium redevelopment, and I understand it will be done in phases, which is a good thing, because we can accommodate some initial phases without upgrades. I think one of the first steps is they're planning to, resize the stadium so it actually gets a little smaller. And so that immediately actually frees up capacity for sewer. And so that allows some housing units or other development to go in. And so we might be okay for a little while, but then we'll hit a wall where we'll have to say, no, you have to wait for, say, our Pearl City projects to be done. And so I think the 60,000 number, that will have to wait for the Pearl City project. Yeah.
Okay. Are there similar implications for the water and electrical side of things?
Can you hear me now?
Okay, from the electrical side, 60,000 units is a lot.
Okay,
3 new
perfect.
substations, maybe? No.
Yeah, no, I mean, really, that's just what it is. So for context, maybe, we do work with a lot of master developers. So
Barely.
Healy out in the Everplains, they're contemplating 11,000 homes. We work on the Ward Village in Kakako area. It's probably roughly 4,000 to 6,000 units. So this 60,000 is or an order of magnitude a lot larger. So I think Hawaiian Electric, at a generation standpoint, we have sufficient generation and as well as transmission, so that's a good thing. So one good thing for Aloha Stadium is it is near transmission facilities that we have in the area, but it would require, for sure, new substations, and it's going to be more than one.
Okay.
So it will take some time.
Not really clear.
Some capacity to bring on additional loads, but yeah, it'll be a long-range plan.
And could you guys talk very briefly about how new massive infrastructure is paid for? Like, is it always recaptured through ratepayers, having to go through the Public Utilities Commission to get an approval for your plan? How does that usually
I can hear her.
Yeah, so typical capital projects, I mean, as Rodney had mentioned earlier, there's a PUC application process for projects that cost more than $2.5 million. So it's kind of a combination between if it's going to be benefiting the greater good, then the utility will be
You can't see me still, right?
pass the cost on to all customers. Certain parts of the projects where it may be a branch to feed just a particular development, that cost would be allocated to the developer or the customer. So it's kind of a combination of the two. But one big thing that we did want to mention is typically, depending on if the distribution is going to be overhead or underground, underground distribution is generally all the infrastructure, the duct lines and the manholes and everything is typically built by the developer at their cost. And then the cost to bring in the cables and transformers and everything else, Hawaiian Electric will allocate that accordingly. So that's a big challenge.
Okay. Do you want to get a question from the audience?
Aloha. My name is Juanita.
It's on.
Hello.
Test.
It's on.
Test.
Hello. Okay. Aloha. My name is Juanita Kawamoto, and I'm here on behalf of Kalihi Palama Hawaiian Civic Club. And my question is directed towards the parallels between what Singapore did to create its affordable housing and what Hawaii can do with regards to this plan. So when we talked earlier about 388 square feet, anywhere between $100,000 to $300,000 a unit, which came out to $257 plus or minus. How does the factor of infrastructure compare from Hawaii to Singapore?
Did you guys go on a trip? Oh, no.
That one might be a little tough to answer because I do think that there are multiple layers of regulatory
Can you hear me now? Is this better?
agencies and, not two or three times as many as what they have in Singapore. And regulation means time. Time means money. And so I think that, let's see, how would we take a stab at that one? Any thoughts, Jack?
Well, just on what fees that we charge for services. So we have our sewer service fees to those users who are using our service. And then new development, we have the wastewater facility charge per unit. And that's our program. So
Yeah.
The little I know about Singapore, though, I think they get their water from Malaysia, and the transfer of water is an issue there. So I do know that they are very progressive with their on-site reuse and efficiencies, rain capture, on-site wastewater treatment, and recycled water. I know they have done a lot more than other cities, and that's driven usually because there's a limitation on water supply that forces them to do that. But it is also for resiliency. That's the other big driver for doing a lot of this on-site reuse, stormwater capture, and I can see high density type developments like this definitely doing that. It should reduce some of the larger infrastructure costs. I mean, you got to do it on site, but it puts less stress on the resource as well. But 60,000 units in one place. I mean, you're only talking water, wastewater, and power, but there's also traffic and social issues, and how do you get around? I mean, is that really the right thing to do? That kind of high density in that area? What do the neighbors think? That kind of thing. There's the equity issues. There are so many larger issues around growth beyond the three infrastructure representatives here that need to be evaluated and resolved as well.
Yeah, so what I heard in the previous panel discussion, what I heard about Singapore is that they didn't have the layers of government, and therefore, like Sarah said, time is money and that type of thing. So, I think that's what I see. I mean, one example that, Gary and I are a little familiar with years ago, I think it was HCDA took initiative to invest in infrastructure for the Kaka'ako area, I think it was. So, little I know about that. I think it was agency that led that, invested in funds to plan for the infrastructure. So that's one example. But I think there was a previous panelist who kind of brought it up as far as another way is have legislation that kind of helps push that along. So I can speak for ourselves. We're regulated by the PUC, and the PUC follows state law and statutes and so forth. So if there's something that was put in there, then potentially maybe that would make it quicker.
Okay, and we'll have one more last question. Kevin Carney, go for it, and you will be our pinch hitter.
Thank you, Sarah. Aloha, Kevin Carney, EAH Housing. We are a nonprofit developer of rent-controlled low-income apartments. And I have a sewer capacity question. We've lost the opportunity to build more affordable housing along Dillingham, along North King Street, Vineyard Boulevard, and Aleha Street. And when I say we, I'm just talking about EAH Housing. We've had opportunities to do projects in the range of 80 to about 140 units in these areas. And each time, there's no sewer capacity. However, we are told that maybe there'll be sewer capacity in 2020. So I wanted to find out if that maybe is getting any firmer or not.
Yes, thank you for that question. So I mentioned one of the big projects we're doing right now. It's on Waikimilo Road, building a new trunk sewer there. I think it's a 54-inch and a 48-inch. And it runs all the way from Nimitz Highway all the way up to School Street. And so when that is done, and it was scheduled to be done in 2020, you'll see, if you ride around that area now, you'll see the construction is very active and causing a lot of traffic congestion. But that is full on, going ahead, trying to meet the deadline. And so that will, when it's done, it will free up a lot of capacity on Dillingham, Liliha. Not everything, it doesn't solve all the problems, but it definitely provides a major improvement.
So there's your business answer. I see Kevin crossing his fingers there. So anyway, I just wanted to wrap up. We do want to thank our panelists here again for their presentations and sharing their knowledge.